All right, friends, how's it going? Zig coming in at the top of the interview. Today on the show, we have Danielle de Picciotto. Danielle is an artist in every regard. She has multiple mediums, be it writing, visual arts, and music, which is mostly what we talk about today. She was a big influence on the early techno scene in Berlin, and her stories of the early Berlin techno scene are very inspiring and hit home with a lot of like punk ideas and this idea of making your own music and taking the harsh environments and making them beautiful. Danielle has a new album out called The Element of Love. It's available on Bandcamp and soon will be available on most platforms. We're going to listen to the track Beautiful Creatures off The Element of Love.
I believe we are superheroes in writhing amnesia, riddled by arrows, bound to a lie, blind to the abyss. Our wings torn with halos of doom, dressed in black, shrouded in gloom. We are superheroes with X-ray vision that confine themselves to the collision of mundane experience with petty power and everyday yellow press trash towers, preferring the security of a regular job than saving the world from a lynch mob. We could vanquish all evil with a toss of our heads, shape-shift to wizards, take dragons to bed. It's all at the tip of our tongue, not the sword, but we ignore our capacities of the unexplored. Kryptonite rays ablaze in our hearts and instead trail the dull shine of phone and computer parts, listening to the complex lies of apes that revise truth as an advertised Bluetooth phone booth. We are superheroes in turmoil, thrashing and crying, entrapped in the mortal coil.
Those beautiful creatures off Element of Love. This podcast is mixed by Studio 44. For any audio, visual, or streaming needs, go to studio44cleveland@gmail.com or studio44cleveland at Facebook and talk to Jay Sparrow. He will get your albums to sound sick. Also, if you can like, subscribe, rate, review the podcast on all the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to super inspiring people like Danielle and share those conversations with you. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Danielle. Gotcha. It sounds like it's kind of the flux of a thing, right?
Yeah.
So where are you at now?
I'm in Berlin, Germany at the moment.
Back in Berlin? Okay,
Yep.
because you've been on the nomadic lifestyle for a while.
Yeah. Well, since 2010.
Right.
And we were actually supposed to be touring last year when the pandemic started here. We were booked like for the whole year. So when all of that was canceled, it was all rebooked for this year, and it's just been rebooked for next year. So I'm kind of stuck in Berlin at the moment, which is okay.
So has that kind of ended the nomadic lifestyle in a way and kind of recentered for a bit because there's nowhere to go? Or is it still kind of the same lifestyle now, just in one general area?
Well, no, it's actually it's interesting because it's the first time in years that I've been in one place for such a long time. And I kind of enjoyed it because I realized how exhausted I was. I mean, constant traveling, like jet lag, especially the last years we were like touring in New Zealand and Australia and the States and Europe. And I was just tired all the time. So it was actually kind of relaxing to be stuck in one place. And I have a studio here that I got, so I could just putter around and, I recorded my album, I wrote a graphic novel, and it was nice being able to just take time.
Right. I was wondering, like, living that way, how one records. or how one is productive in like I saw your graphic novel and the pages are there's an immense amount of detail put in each one and it's a really cool way to tell your story. But that takes time and effort and to be in one spot to do that. Like
Yeah.
how does she do this on the road? Like it's hard enough to like I mean some bands, you know, write tunes and rehearse during sound checks and stuff, but to do something with that much detail and that much focus when you're constantly moving had to be a had to be a feat. Um so
Yeah.
has sorry.
Yeah, it's pretty exhausting. I mean, when we started, when we became nomads, I kind of before that I would do things that were a little larger. Like if I was drawing or painting, I'd do pretty large things, and I also did objects and stuff, And so obviously, when the decision was made that we were going to become nomads, I kind of decided, okay, well, I'm going to just have to reduce my sizes, and I just do small drawings and recording. Well, I've recorded basically everywhere in hotel rooms, on the beach, at friends' places, in the train, anywhere I can. I mean, with nowadays with Live or whatever program you work with, you can basically do it anywhere. So I guess it also adds the atmosphere that I have on my albums that I recorded them in so many different places.
Because your music does have this vast space, which is musically like space and music in an art. It's such a big deal, and it's hard to fake that. It's hard to manufacture space in a pure way.
True, true. That's interesting that you say that. Yeah, that's true because it's interesting that you say that because it's something that's really important to me too. And I work a lot on that to be able to really have that in my music.
Well, it definitely comes through, and like I think part of like the Berlin early techno scene was kind of like space was kind of a big deal. So to kind of jump into your history, you when did you move to Berlin?
In 87.
87, and you were living in New York before, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so musically in New York, what was going on? Was it like the no wave scene?
Yeah. Lydia Lunch, Jim Thirlwall, Fetus,
Um,
those things. Yeah.
Contortions.
Yeah.
Now, were you seeing live music that time, or were you playing in New York?
I wasn't playing. No, no,
No?
no. I
Okay.
was. I was basically. I was studying back then. I was at FIT. That's kind of where I learned and I was at Parsons, and that's where I learned illustration. And I was going to see a lot of shows and stuff. I mean, I went to Say the Robots, and I saw Andy Warhol, stuff like that.
Whoa.
I wasn't
Sick.
actually. Yeah,
That's so
crazy.
cool.
I know. Only very shortly though,
But
but it was
still,
amazing. But I wasn't really. I mean, I've always played my instruments. I started playing piano and violin very early on, but I never really actually. I mean, I sang a lot, but only for myself. I never really knew if I was going to play music, if that was going to be like my career. And it happened more by chance when I came to Berlin that this band asked me. It was kind of like a hip hop crossover band called Space Cowboys, if I wanted to sing for them. And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? That's kind of how it happened, but I didn't really plan it.
because wasn't it they thought you put out a record or something? They
Right,
they confused you with a different Danielle.
exactly. They confused me with another girl that I recorded with my back then boyfriend.
Oh,
And I was
okay.
like, wow, I wonder why they're asking me, but sure, why not?
Well, so what led from New York to Berlin? Like, how'd you get there? Like, that's a big jump. That's not
It
like
is.
did a friend who was traveling invite you, or was it an opportunity that arose to like study abroad?
I I was invited to work for an advertising agency in Germany after I finished studying. They had somehow contacted me through somebody else that knew me, and I don't even know how I got that offer. And I was like, that's interesting. And so I went there. That was in Cologne, and because I couldn't speak German because my mother's German.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, I was raised, with two languages. So I went there, but I didn't really enjoy working for an advertising agency. And after about three-fourths of the year, I decided to like go back to New York because I had a couple of job offers there. And then I thought, okay, before I go back to New York, I'm going to visit Berlin because I had a friend that lived there just to see Berlin, and then I'll go back. And so then when I arrived in Berlin, I was just like blown away by the whole atmosphere, and it was just crazy. I mean, it was such a creative place, and it was so cheap, and it wasn't dangerous. And New York in the 80s was super dangerous, and it was super expensive, and it was kind of like heaven. So I was like offered a room, and I just said, okay, I'll take it, and I just stayed.
Wow. That's a
Yeah.
how like and I guess the besides the danger being the difference, what was like the scene like as far as creatively compared to New York? Was it very similar or was it like more expansive?
It was pretty similar, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a pretty strong connection between New York and Berlin back then. Like the experimental musicians that were playing here, like Nick Cave or Einstürzende Neubauten, they knew all the music, like all the musicians, Swans and stuff like that. They knew each other. So, and there was a similar atmosphere because New York was so dangerous and so run down and kind of like this dystopian place. And Berlin was surrounded by a wall and was super, super poor. I mean, it was extremely poor, and we were still like, it was still surrounded by the World War II rubble, basically. So they had a very similar atmosphere. It was kind of like both those places, you had the feeling you were in like a black and white movie.
Interesting. It's weird that or not weird. It's very serendipitous that it's like out of this destruction of some sort, out of this danger and this danger of I guess a past danger. There's this beauty and this new life being born out of the rubble from it.
Exactly. That's what I loved about it.
Wow.
That's why I stayed, because I was like, it was like a time capsule. Like Berlin was like a time capsule because it was surrounded by this wall and nothing could really be renovated because it was kind of like in the middle of East Germany. So everything was kind of slow and dreamy. And then there were all these really experimental musicians and artists there. And the contradiction of that was just so fascinating. I was like, wow, this is amazing.
There's something the yin and yang of the destruction and creation is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, Now, when you started playing with Space Cowboys, like that was just you got this random offer and we're cool with it. Like that sounds
Yeah.
like that's like coming out of the shell of like if you weren't doing music and were doing like illustration and working for like a with advertisement companies, was it kind of like were you doing designs and stuff? Were you like
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
layouts and
well, not really. They had like these, it was weird back then. They had this like short phase of this thing called living robots. And so they had people like models that were supposed to act as if they were robots.
okay.
And they asked me to like design their surroundings and their costumes and like the whole atmosphere. So it was kind of surreal. I had to like make these really odd objects for them and stuff like that. So in a way, it was kind of fun, but they hardly paid me, and it was so much work. And I don't like advertising, so
Right. It's
um,
very
yeah.
well, we need to get more people in. How can we reach the older people? Can you make an older looking robot suit? Like what? But that kind of from what I understand of the early Berlin like techno scene, like there was all these clubs. Like I read something about this club. I could get the name wrong, but it was called UFO, and it's
Uh-huh.
kind of
Yeah.
where okay, cool. So it was where like some early acid jazz got or acid jazz acid techno got started, and
It was
like
acid jazz. Yeah,
oh
yeah,
acid
acid jazz.
okay,
Yeah, absolutely.
and
Um,
like and it's that club was just like a basement for the first like birth of it. The first rendition of it was just a basement that would redefine itself like every weekend. It seemed like it, or every like whenever a big show would be, they would have like a whole different setup, from what I understand. And if you're going into it with that skill set, it'll make sense. It made sense, or makes sense why that seemed to resonate with you.
Well, I mean, like I said, I'd always done music. Started doing music really, really early. And I was always interested in music. And I always loved writing, all kinds of stuff. So I was really, really interested in especially the music scene in Berlin and also the art scene, design and all that. It just kind of disappeared pretty quickly because it wasn't really my thing. So my life has kind of always been in a way that I discovered things by chance. I kind of made little detours until I suddenly was on the right road again. And so with Berlin, just that was the right place for me at the right time. And I kind of met, because, it was surrounded by a wall. So you met DJs and you just met everybody within a week. So like within a week or two, I basically knew everybody there. And because it was such a destroyed and kind of underground city, a lot of the clubs and a lot of the bars were in basements and in like illegal places and stuff like that. And I started working in cafes and bars pretty early on. So in that way, luckily, I was able to experience these early techno clubs, which basically started out with me and a couple of friends doing illegal parties with acid jazz, my then boyfriend, because it was a completely new music and nobody else really knew about it because it was from England and from Detroit. And my boyfriend back then was a DJ, so he started getting a couple of early records and they was like, hey, come on, let's do parties with this music. And we were like, cool, this is really great. This is deconstructed music. And that's how it started. And the UFO was basically this like tiny little basement. You had to open this like trap door in the floor and then climb down this kind of chicken ladder, like this really wooden thing. And there was no other way to get in and out. So actually it was like really dangerous, but of course nobody cared. And it was big enough to hold about, I guess, 100 people, really, really tightly packed. And it was incredibly dirty. We only had like a little board for the bar, like a piece of wood and stuff like that. And the DJ, I think he was like in this weird kind of closet thing that didn't have a door because it was so tight. And it was just crazy because, it was so intense. Like the first people that discovered that music in Berlin, they were so enthusiastic that people would just go down in that hole and dance for, I don't know, 2 days.
Well, time. If you're in this basement and you can't see the outside world, time had to be like this weird, relevant thing. Like with trancey or techno music, like it kind of relates in a way to space, like we were talking about. But instead of like openness, it can like fills it with like eighth notes and 16th notes, and it kind of becomes like its own like one note space in a way.
Exactly.
So trance music is really I can see how it really locks people in where they're really into the moment.
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. That's so punk rock. That's like all the house shows where the scenes start is always in the basement. It's so it's so weird how like big movements of music and style and creativity and art come from the underground, come from like the dingiest and dustiest, I guess, if it's in a basement. I'm sure there's a fair amount of dust.
Oh yeah.
Places and like, because
yeah.
with your boyfriend at the time, right? You guys did the Love Parade, which was a fairly big deal of spreading that music around.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that basically came from like, we had a couple of reasons for doing that. One was exactly because we were tired of those dirty basements.
Fair enough.
We're like, let's do this somewhere where we're not like covered in cobwebs when we go home and completely, dirty with dust and all that. That was one of the reasons. And the other reason was also that we'd always been fascinated by, those Rio de Janeiro parades where they dress up and they wear those great costumes and they're dancing to their music. And we always wanted to go there, but we never had the money. And then one day my boyfriend said, you know what, why don't we just do it here with our music and our costumes and our dresses or whatever? Because I was doing a lot of club wear back then too. And I was like, that's a great idea. And so then we started thinking about how to do it because, I mean, nowadays it's pretty normal to have people doing stuff like that. But back then it was like really unheard of. I mean, to organize a parade in Berlin. I mean, Berlin didn't really had a terrible history of parades. And it was a kind of subject.
So the new one's kind of a oh snap is a having to pull off. Did you guys just kind of do it? Did you have to get permits or anything, or was it just?
Yeah, we had to get permits,
Okay.
and then because we were kind of like we were living in a city that was surrounded by a wall, and living in a city like that where we were living in an apartment right on the edge of the wall. So when we would look out of our kitchen window on the third floor, we would look over the wall into East Berlin.
Whoa.
And there was kindergarten, and I could always hear the children like laughing and playing and stuff. And it was so creepy because you knew that they were over there in a completely different system and they would never be able to come to where we are. So when we were thinking about it, we were kind of saying, this new music is so great. And the great thing about music is that it just flies over everywhere,
Right.
It flies over any wall. And so then we said, we should really actually do this as a demonstration not against something, but for something, for music and for freedom and for all those kind of things. And that's how we came to the idea of doing the parade. And so the first time we did it, Berlin back then was super like, everybody wore black suits and was like, like Nick Cave, very black dyed hair, very serious and stuff. And we put on these really like streetwear, colorful clothes, and we started dancing in the street, and they were like, that is so uncool. But then they kind of noticed how much fun we were having. And at one point they were like, hey, can't you do it again? And then next year we want to be part of it.
Even the guys dressed up in black, looking down, want to have fun.
Right.
But it takes someone to go out there and do it and just to show that it's possible. It's did like the clubwear stuff, did that kind of as far as designing that, did the skill set of making robot wear come in handy there?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's awesome. And then it grew, right? Exponentially, this love parade.
Yeah. Then the next year it was really special because that was, the wall fell. So the next parade that we did, it was basically East German and West German people dancing together for the first time on this parade. And that kind of, I think, it was a pretty incredible moment because, people were like so happy to be out of that situation. And they just, for them, techno was, the sound of their generation because it was music that had a DJ but didn't have like rock stars on the stage. There were no hierarchies. It was just like music for everybody. And so that generated such an incredible, I don't know, just some magic spark. And so then they said, we have to do this again. And then so every year it became more until 5 years later, it was 1.5 million people dancing to the music. And that was pretty incredible because, we were dancing down those big streets that Hitler had been walking down 50 years before. So it was kind of like a purging through music.
Right.
It was interesting,
That's beautiful. That's so so surreal to within the second year of doing this thing you guys kind of just did for fun in a way to be celebrating this beauty and this love and bringing these people to the noise, the muffled noise that was the neighbors on the other side of the wall. You're now welcome in that party. You know what I mean? Not that they weren't, but there was just the physical barrier and to be immersing in it and just be in this. That's so even just thinking about that, I'm getting like goosebumps. That's so surreal and cool that music can bring people together that way, and like
Yeah.
how that's and like to be part of the reason that this big parade plowed through these streets has to be like that has to still be a giddy thing to think about.
Yeah, it was really amazing. And the really great thing about it was that, you know, we didn't have any money. We didn't do it because we were being sponsored or
Right.
because we had lots of money. We did, I mean, we had no money at all. You know, we just rented that a little truck and we put a PA on it. And somehow, I don't know, being able to generate something that big with so little money and also watching the wall fall, which, you know, nobody ever thought that would happen, somehow made me believe in miracles.
Right. Well, after
You know, anything can happen.
yeah, after seeing that, how can you not think that if we that's like the most positive vibe like we can tear down the wall physically that's dividing us. How can we not tear down the walls mentally with what we're making
Exactly.
here?
Yes.
That's so uplifting, and if that doesn't inspire you to create for the rest of your life, I don't know what would.
Exactly. Exactly. So I still really, you know, it still nourishes my soul having experienced that. That's why I wrote the graphic novel too, because I thought that time was something so special that I really have to kind of go into detail and just speak about it more. I'm translating it into English at the moment, and I hope that it'll be coming out in the US end of the year, maybe next year, where I really go into detail speaking about how all of that happened and what the 80s music scene was like and the culture and the art, and then how through the fall of the wall the whole techno thing started and all those things, because it was a really special time.
Right. Well, it's just like any of those like births of punk movements or no wave or like any musical movement that the origin of it is so desired that like to it's like diving into the source and like so any like firsthand information that most people are like after and have a graphic novel version of it is so like it seems such like something you would do with your style and so cool. So I can't wait for it to be in English so I can read it. Does that language barrier run? Have you does that run in like complicate things a lot as far as like touring like in like New Zealand and Australia and in America? Do you run into that like difficulty or is it
No,
okay? Because you speak both German and English, like
yeah.
but I mean I guess like with press and stuff and like putting CDs out and like I guess it's like double the manufacturing. I guess.
Um, Well, I mean, if I write books, yeah, then I have to do it in German and in English. Or like I wrote another book, I wrote in English first, and it still hasn't been translated in German. So with books, but with music, I mean, usually my lyrics are in English, so everybody understands English, or almost everybody does. So I don't have to translate that.
That's a cool place to be in because with like certain words in English and certain words in German, I think there's language wise there's like a one way to say it in German and one way to say it in English and like when you're translating it, it's sometimes there isn't a direct translation for that one word. Does it?
Yeah.
I find that fascinating. I find language fascinating and how like one phrase can mean something and then like there's not a way to say it, so you have to describe it in the other language.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that very difficult, maybe because I don't know what it is. I've heard that from quite a few people that like grew up learning or speaking two languages that they find translating really difficult.
Hmm.
I don't know why that is, but I work a lot on that. It takes forever. Like you have to do that. It's yeah, it's a lot of
Well,
work.
yeah, because it's just this, but you don't know
Yeah,
what that is, so now I got to be like, well, you know what? I don't know. Dr. Pepper
yeah,
tastes like there's 32 different things to describe it. Like,
exactly.
um, now growing up, like your mother spoke German. Did your father?
No,
Okay.
no.
And your father was in the military?
Yeah,
So were you moving around a lot
all the time.
all the time?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I was born in Tacoma, and I think we left after a month or something, and then we were in Denver, then we were in Chicago, and then we were in Washington, D.C., and in between he was stationed in Korea and then in Germany.
Wow.
And then, it was just like
Yeah.
nonstop. I
So
think we moved 13 times by the time I was 12.
like when you're that young, you're taking so much in and like to have your environment constantly moving. So that must have made the nomadic life decision fairly easy because that was kind of
Yeah.
like home in a way.
In a way, yeah. I mean, Berlin kind of was when I moved to Berlin, it was the first time that I actually stayed somewhere for that long. I moved there in 87 and I stayed there until 2010. I'd never been anywhere that long. And that was interesting, but I mean, for me, traveling is a pretty natural state. Like I don't know, like I feel at home almost everywhere. I'm really easy in that way. So I guess but I didn't enjoy traveling that much when I was a child. Like I had to change schools all the time.
Right.
And with my last name, it's like,
Oh, yeah. I imagine teachers being like, Danielle.
right.
And just like when you're younger, you're trying to grasp how the world works, and like when you're like always constantly on the move, it's kind of your world, and you know what I mean. Like going to school is kind of like the learning the extension of like the social interactions, and jumping to all these different places. It's always different. Like, oh, we
Yeah.
don't we don't have recess here. We have 15-minute breaks or what, you know what I mean? Just like little things like that kind of set up how you interact later on, or how you like manage your time or your work ethic. And it's something I don't think anyone, like, you don't like consciously think of when you're going through a school like that, but it kind of does roll off later. And
Yeah.
so was it to be in one place, was that difficult? Like when you initially decided to stay in Berlin, or was Berlin just so exciting that it felt like you're moving around all these places because there's just so much going on?
It was so exciting. It was just insane. I mean, it really was. It was like nonstop. Part because also in Berlin, there's not like there's no time where clubs close, so you can stay
Oh.
out for a week and party for a week, and it's normal. So there was like nonstop parties, nonstop shows, nonstop events, people working. Everybody had 5 bands. Everybody was like doing music, doing art, writing, making their own clothes. Like everybody was like a I don't know, interdisciplinary artist. And it was just like nonstop. I mean, it was so excessive. It was just insane. And so I think that um, almost for the first, I don't know, until 95, I had the feeling that it was like a nonstop party. I mean, when the wall came down, we started discovering, East Berlin, and there were all these places that were empty, and we could just go inside and open up clubs and open up galleries and do parties, and nobody knew who was the owner of the building. So it was like total anarchy.
Right. But in this
So
cool, positive way, it sounds.
yeah, it was super positive. That's something that I've often thought about because, nobody could really enforce anything because nobody knew who the owners were. Nobody knew, like, it was all being figured out. They were like, trying to figure out how to put everything together again. And nobody really used that to destroy or to be negative. Everybody was kind of like super positive and just making things pretty. Like, let's look, there's an old factory here. Let's go inside and decorate it and do some kind of party or a show or whatever. It was super positive. It was pretty amazing.
That, like, with that space, because you would think people would be trying to assert, like, this is my spot. This is what I do. Now have a thing, but to have it
Exactly.
be so, like, accepting is, I'm having trouble fathoming it. Like,
Yeah.
because maybe I'm being a little bit pessimistic, thinking like, oh, it would go south quick. But I guess it just speaks on volumes with how things were, and then just to have stuff open up. Was it when the wall did come down? Was there like these different like facts of like or sections of like, I imagine there was some techno on the other side of the wall, and some other like creative, like was there like a melding of these ideas in a way that stuck out as like, oh, you're from the East, you're from the West, this is cool. Like, could you tell in a way if someone was like aside from like maybe them just being, I guess creatively, was there a difference?
That's an interesting question. I could go over to East Berlin because I was American. It was
Okay.
much easier for me to be able to go there than, for instance, a real Berliner, like my ex-boyfriend or even my husband. Now they're both real Berliners,
Right.
born in Berlin. And for them, it was really, really difficult to be able to go to East Berlin. But for me, it was super easy. I would just go through Checkpoint Charlie. And I met this other American girl who knew a couple of people there pretty early on, like I think in the third week that I was in Berlin, and she had a little motorcycle, and so she would always take me over, and I got to know all kinds of musicians and artists, and I was really surprised at how similar in a way things were. Like
Yeah.
they were very experimental and they were kind of taste wise similar to what we were doing and similar to what things were happening in New York too, except that for them it was really dangerous because, it wasn't allowed and they would have, like, for the fashion that underground fashion designers were doing or music with, like, lyrics that were against the system, they could go to jail really, really easily. So they had that extra thing of actually doing something which was dangerous. But in general, you had the feeling that it was a certain era and certain ideas or certain tastes or something. They were
Yeah.
kind of all the underground, which is really interesting.
So I guess the music goes over the wall. Like,
Exactly.
that's fascinating. When did you meet Gudrun Gut?
I met her in pretty early on too. I think it was in 89, 88, 89, somewhere around there. She was her boyfriend was a producer, and he was producing my boyfriend.
Okay. All
And
right.
so I went to visit my boyfriend being produced by her boyfriend one day, and she was there, and we just immediately got along, and so then we started doing stuff together.
And like she did the Oceans Club, right?
Exactly. We kind of
Okay.
did that together. We started that together. Yeah.
And that's also a very interesting like collective in a way, like they kind of go back to like it's not like this stifling of people trying to assert who they are. It's like the Oceans Club, from what I understand, was like a collective, and it rotated who was in it, and like and eventually got a radio show, I think, which
Yeah.
makes sense with it. But you designed like I guess clubwear for her as well.
No, no, no.
No,
By then
okay,
I had kind of stopped. I mean, we really started because I stopped playing with Space Cowboys in '95, and I started recording music with her around '96, and that's when the first Ocean Club album was also done. And we kind of started that together. And what her idea was that she wanted to do something. I mean, she likes groups like that. She likes working with different people. Like at the moment, she also has a project called Monika Werkstatt, which is very similar. So that you just works with different people and then combines it to a compilation, or everybody does improv together, electronic improv, and so then we were kind of saying, okay, well, how are we going to present this? And then I knew the owner of the Tresor, which was a huge club back then. And I asked him if he could give us a room. And so he gave us a room, and I did all the decoration for the room. And like I built furniture, like underwater furniture and stuff like that.
cool.
And then we called it the Ocean Club, and the Ocean Club basically was the name of the album, and then became a radio station too.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's so interesting. It's so interesting how you just jumped into this music thing, like, and just immersed yourself in it. So with Space Cowboys, you were a singer, and you were kind of backing up like the rest of the band in a way. So was the move to working with the Ocean Club, was that like a big shift because you're putting yourself up front?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was up front with Space Cowboys too. We were two singers. It was a guy and me,
Okay.
and so we were like, I was rapping a lot. That was like
Whoa.
like rock,
Yeah,
hip
yeah.
hop crossover. So, and I've always, like I said, I've always liked writing. I used to, like when I was really young, I wrote tons of poetry, and then when they asked me to be part of their band, I was like, wow, rap is interesting because it's kind of like, lyrics are kind of like poems too. So that really was up my alley. But when Gudrun asked me, trip hop had just come up. I had just heard Portishead for the first time.
Okay.
And I was like, wow, I like this even better because it has that kind of like surreal, dreamy style. And it's also kind of, lyrics are really important for it. And so working together with her, because she was back then already electronic, I was like, wow, I really like doing this electronic work with this kind of lyrical thing. So it was kind of like a transition from going from hip hop to trip hop and then electronic music. And yeah.
That makes sense because that space is starting to become more clear or
Exactly.
more vast in that next step.
Exactly. Yeah.
Was there any New York hip hop influence that made that jump into just doing hip hop easy? Or
Well, I always liked garage music. I loved it. When I was in New York, there was a lot of that going on. And I mean, that doesn't have like lyrics or rap or anything, but I like that kind of like bassy kind of rhythmic music. And so I like that with hip hop too. But I really like dreamy stuff or kind of also melodies and stuff. So at one point it was just a little too I don't know how to put it. It wasn't surreal enough for me.
Gotcha. Well, it makes that space is clearly heard in everything that you've done prior.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that you found the space you wanted to be in and immersed
Yeah.
yourself in it. Diehaut,
Die Haut.
Diehaut,
Ah,
um,
Die Haut.
Diehaut. Uh,
Yes.
so when did you start working with them, or because that had like Nick Cave, right, and Kid Congo Powers?
Yeah.
When did that come
Um,
about?
well, Die Haut was basically an instrumental band that would invite singers to participate and sing for them. And all of them had other bands too. So the guitar player later on became the guitar player for Einstürzende Neubauten. And like I mentioned, Berlin was, everybody kind of knew each other in Berlin. And so to be honest, back then I was doing stuff with all kinds of people on the side besides Space Cowboys and Gudrun. So they just asked me if I wanted to sing on one of their albums, and I was like, sure. So everybody was kind of singing on everybody's albums back then.
That's so cool. It makes that collective thing. It's easier to be immersed in something and want to support it if you're a part of it. Like,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's amazing. That the
I
scene
mean,
was like
Berlin
that.
had that collective feeling a lot. I think it still came from that feeling of being an island, within a wall, and
Right.
people were used to thinking that way. It took a long time. I think it was actually only end of the '90s that people started thinking in like a kind of competitive way. That's maybe more like other places. Because that's when it started becoming more expensive and, jobs were hard to get. But before that, when it wasn't that expensive, people weren't competitive and everybody was like, hey, I've got this project, you want to sing? Or, and everybody would. Kind of reminds me of Detroit, actually, because I have a couple of friends in Detroit and they say a similar thing. They say that everybody in Detroit has like 5 bands and they all sing in each other's bands and stuff.
For the little that I've experienced playing in Detroit, it seems to be true. Like, when was the last time you were there? When was the last time you guys
In
played there?
Detroit?
Yeah.
I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago. I can't remember. I think it's 4 or 5 years ago.
Art guy.
No, it was a really nice club called Sonnerfurus.
Okay.
It's a really long name.
That's not, oh man, I was like, there's this art gallery venue there called Art of Armageddon Beach Party, which I don't know, seems up the vibe of what we've been talking with. And those guys have been there for a minute. I was gonna be like, that'd be a crazy world connection right now. So so it's interesting that I don't know what was like with Kid Powers and Kid Congo Powers and Nick Cave, because Nick Cave kind of seemed to be kind of painting the scene in a way, like this dark kind of like deep thought existentialist. What was it? Did you get to work one on one, or were you just kind of laying down tracks? Did you get a sense of the character of Nick Cave?
No, he wasn't in Berlin back then. He had already moved away. So I think, I don't even know if did he sing on that album, Spring?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah. No, he must have recorded it in I think he was in London back then.
Oh, okay.
So, but I mean, I knew him because I used to live together with the keyboarder of Nick Cave, Roland Wolf, who I was actually engaged to also for a short time before he died. So, the Bad Seeds also have a lot. They used to, go in and out of our factory loft where I used to live. So, but he basically moved to London quite shortly after I had moved to Berlin. So I only saw him when he did shows. And Kid Congo I toured with years later. We did this tour with Kid and with Julie Cruz, which was kind of a crazy tour.
Yeah.
And of Finland. It was funny. Yeah, he's great. I love Kid.
And he's still active, and he's coming up with all these cool records, and he's such a charismatic character. Like,
totally,
so cool. He just put something out too that with what's the name of his group? But it's super
Pink
like
Monk.
Judge Bandy's super dancey. It's like an EP that's got a pocket.
He's amazing. I love him. He was one of the first people I met actually in Berlin, because he was Roland, who was the keyboarder of Nick Cave, best friend. So he would always come to our factory loft and hang out there was this big red sofa, and we'd just sit on that big red sofa. It was this huge loft, huge. I mean, it was really huge. It had like 10 rooms, and it was kind of, I don't know, it was just huge. And it only cost like $15 a month, and we were 5 people, and we had all the space. So there was like nothing except 15 guitars and a refrigerator and a couple of mattresses and stuff. So we used to hang out on the red sofa with Kid.
Nothing but space and time to be creative. That's awesome.
Yeah.
What was it like? Did you ever get the show like friends from the States? The Berlin scene when you were in it, like. Did you ever get to blow your friends' minds by being like, "Oh yeah, this is normal life," and a week of partying goes, and then like, what happened? Did you get to share that experience?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. What was
Yes.
what was the reaction? Like, were people just like, "What? What did I just endure?" Like,
Well, a couple of them actually moved to Berlin immediately, just like I did back then. They were just like, "Oh my God, I think I'm going to stay."
this is it. This is it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Did you ever meet Adele Berthet?
No.
Okay. She was a singer in the no wave scene from New York who moved to Berlin momentarily. That was just around the same time, it sounds like. But kind of shifting gears. So like your music like slowly seems like it built up and more atmospheric stuff came in, and like this space was created. And like, when did you meet Alexander? Because you guys' album list is fairly dense, and like that space is there in all these records as well.
Yeah. Well, we met pretty early on too. I mean, basically when I moved to Berlin again because of Roland, who was his best friend. So Neubauten were in the factory loft all the time. And we were good friends, but he always had girlfriends and I always had boyfriends. And then but we always kind of like, we started collaborating around 95, where he did a piece of theater and I was doing like the set design or whatever. And then in like at the end of the 90s, the beginning of 2001 was when we seriously started collaborating. I had been invited to do like this installation, this art installation in a museum. And I wanted to have live music, and he was doing a lot of experimental live music back then. So I asked him if he felt like doing something together with me. And so we did it together, and it was so much fun that we just kind of took it from there. And we were doing a lot for the first 6 or 7 years, we did a lot of like audio visual stuff where we would do music together, but I would also do huge stage sets and do readings and stuff like that. So it was pretty interdisciplinary. And it was a lot of fun. It was kind of like an experimentation of like, how can we work together? Because, I kind of came from my side of the music spectrum and he came from his. And then we kind of just, worked on it until we kind of suddenly found a sound that was really good. And we've kind of been concentrating on that ever since. So
is that, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you.
Yeah. So basically it's kind of like the album Perseverancia.
Yeah.
That was where we felt, that's the sound we've been looking for. But we did a couple of things, albums and stuff before that, which we're still kind of searching for that specific sound.
Gotcha. Because like it seems like at least with like a record like the Hitman's Heel, it's a much it's electronic, but it's got a lot of like acoustic instruments in it. Was that kind of the influence? Was with Alexander was like bringing in like some of these more like folk instruments into songwriting, and like it seemed like a concept record itself. So that might be a not the greatest example, but.
Well, it was kind of because he really likes Americana, like a lot. And he used to have a band called Yiva Mountain Boys where he would do a lot of cover versions of songs, which is actually really, really good. And he's a great singer. And then so we were like, well, maybe we should try doing an album kind of in that direction. And we did it, and it was a lot of fun. But for me, it was too structured. So I was like, I really, I think that I need to be less structured because I don't really want to do ballads. And he doesn't come from, Neubauten are not ballady at all. Right, so obviously he's not from that direction either. So it was kind of like a concept album, but it wasn't perfect for us. So we continued working on it. And actually, we recorded Perseverancia at Joshua Tree. And speaking of how, places influence you, just seeing that, it was a great studio. And it had this huge glass wall. And while we were kind of like jamming, we just saw the desert in front of us all the time. And that really kind of automatically gave us that space. And it just opened all the doors. It was pretty amazing.
That makes sense. It's interesting that the first record I heard of yours was actually Hitman's Heel, and like everything I've listened to post was like, where did that one come from? Because like it's so like it's like it's so structured, and like that's interesting that you were kind of using the ballad form. I didn't think of it like that. That it makes a lot of times when you boil stuff down and you give yourself parameters in a way, it forces you to be creative within those parameters. And
exactly.
Like if you look at the White Stripes, there's 2 instruments and they get a lot of completely different music with that. And like with that, and it was so interesting because I'm like, wow, these guys really got a thing. It's like, and then the listen when Howard gave me the link for the new record, I'm like, wait, what? And like. It's so expansive, and you have a couple meditation records, and like then I saw you and Alexander have like there's a whole other side of like records you've put out together, like the immense amount of creative output that you guys have done living the nomadic lifestyle is absurd in a good way. Like to be able to put out that much and be focused to do that much when you're trying to get from place to place it makes sense why you're always tired.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny because it kind of taught us, there's I mean, I don't know. You probably know the same thing. It's like, there's stuff that you like that you think is really, really great. But when you try to do that, it's not you. And that was kind of what
Right.
happened in Hitman's Heel. We were like trying to find something where, because I mean, I have a classic education in music. I learned classic violin, I learned classic piano, I play the hurdy-gurdy. I play like these really weird old instruments.
Right.
And Alex plays drums and bass and guitar, and he comes from an experimental electronic band. And then I have that weird electronic background with Gudrun. So we're like, how on earth are we going to bring these things together? And we like didn't know, and we're just trying and trying. And then we're kind of like, well, why don't we try doing ballads, because we really like Americana, and Alex loves, playing the banjo, and he loves that kind of, he loves blues. I love blues, whatever. And we did it, but then we noticed that's just not us. We really love listening to it, and we love other bands that do it, but it's not us. We have to find our own sound that kind of combines our weird backgrounds together. And then it just really magically happened in the desert. It was so weird because we went there because it's like the studio of a friend of ours there. And we just brought our instruments, and we're like, okay, look, we're just not going to have a concept at all. We're just going to jam. We're just going to, improvise. And we did that for a week. And all of a sudden, this music was somehow being born that we didn't even know how to describe. We still don't know how to describe it. And it kind of became our sound.
A couple questions with that. Like, when working with Gudrun, when like you came in with like this classical, like kind of at least traditional, I imagine with playing piano and violin, you get a kind of a basic concept of harmony and like how a
Right.
traditional theory, and like I know it's different compared to like the rock band world where it's like improvise using B flat pentatonic roll, but like with the classical attempt, it's a little more structured, and like and with like I know with No Wave, and from what I've picked up on, like diving into understanding the techno scene, like it was almost kind of the opposite. Like you went in with not knowing anything, like like traditional theory wise, and you just creating. Was there like a kind of a was that like a hindering knowing some traditional theory, or did it
Totally.
make it easier to dive in?
It's totally a problem. I mean, I've heard that from almost every person that, was trained classically and that wants to like do music that's not classic. It's really, really difficult. I mean, I've kind of battled with that from until, I don't know, almost the end of the 90s, because whatever you do, I mean, I played a lot of like keyboards for Space Cowboys and for Gudrun too. And you always end up playing Bach or something. It's terrible because I had really strict classical teachers too, and they would like, hit me with a violin bow if I wasn't playing the way I should, and like super strict teachers, and they really like, I don't know, they mind, I don't know, somehow they do something with your brain. In any case, it's really, really difficult to get that out of your system to just be able to improvise. And that actually it was another reason why with Hitman's Heel we were so structured, because I was playing keyboard on that one,
Mm.
and somehow it's just I don't know, it's really. And then again, for some really weird reason in the desert, all of a sudden I could get away from that. And I mean, still when you hear our music you can hear the classical influence, but that's the great thing of like, we're somehow, because we're such opposites, Alex can break that with his experimental stuff. And then I'm really into sound. Like I love weird sounds. Like really, that's my electronic side. I love odd sounds. So then when he becomes too perfect, because he's a really good bass player and he's a really good drummer too, when he becomes too perfect, I kind of break that with weird sounds. So we kind of do each other the favor of kind of breaking down whatever the other person is doing that's too structured or too perfect, like, too clean or whatever.
Yeah, you can depend on each other for taking it out there. Like that, this groove's
Exactly.
good. Check this out. Like
Right.
that's that's working in the spaces that are created in between the groove, like in the what
Exactly.
can lay on there, because like that's a to have like a very structured thing, or even if you looked at it like in sense of a melody and harmony, like if you're playing a song where there's a lot of chords, the melody's going to be fairly simple, or if there's a lot of melody, the chords are going to be pretty simple. In a way,
Yeah,
it's like an interesting way to play with that, but with more grandeur sounds and like so that's
yeah,
wow, like that definitely had to be like a mind trip to get out of that rigid, like I can see where like when you first start playing something as taxing as like a violin, like the posture and the approach is very specific to get a desired sound, right?
yeah,
Like the technique is crucial for that instrument. And you have to have that dedicated being hit with maybe not being hit with that's pretty rough. I don't know, that doesn't I'm surprised the music stuck with you with that. That sounds traumatic. um but
it was. I didn't actually want to play violin again, and Alex forced me. I had kind of said I'm never going to play violin. I hated it
right.
because it was so traumatic, and I was only playing keyboards and singing with Space Cowboys and with Gudrun. I was like not. I mean, I played with Malaria, Gudrun's band once. I went on tour with her in the States, and I played at Limelight with violin, and I hated it. And so then Alex started pestering me. He was like, "You have to play violin," and he was like pestering and pestering me for years. And then at one point, I was doing it. We were doing a project with Mick Harvey from the Bad Seeds and
Yeah.
with for theater, and then somebody said, "Oh, we could really use a violin here." And then Alex looked at me, and I was like, "Okay,
was, was it
girl."
was it easy to pick back up?
Not really. It took me a little bit, but for some odd reason, all of a sudden. Um, I started using it more like a sound instrument than the classic way of playing
Okay.
violin. And I tried doing that with all my instruments, like not playing them the way you're supposed to play. And that helped me getting away from that structured thing. I like playing violin more. I mean, I do melodies and stuff like that, but I kind of see it more of a sound instrument now. I don't know how to describe it. That helped me to get away from my hatred.
No, it makes sense. It's like that sound, that space that you found when you started working with Gudrun, like it just kind of you immersed it in every other way that you could. Um,
Yeah.
do you like do you practice like mindfulness stuff? Do you meditate? Do you find like comfort within that space? Like even when it's not there?
Yeah, I mean, we started meditating when we became nomads because we noticed that to be able to survive a lifestyle that's that grueling, and especially being together 24 hours a day,
Right.
you have to
Yeah.
somehow, enlarge in the space within because otherwise you just end up fighting all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when you're stressed out all the time and you're moving all the time, and almost in a way, I guess that makes sense that in that way you're not moving because everything else is constantly moving.
Exactly. And kind of like focusing on yourself, on your inside, basically, instead of focusing on the outside all the time, gives you a certain kind of calm in the situation of traveling all the time. So, you know, wearing headphones and just not hearing anything and meditating, it was something that we do. I mean, I still do it all the time because it really, in the pandemic too, it's helped me a lot. It just makes you calmer.
Right. It kind of that's the sense I from the on Element of Love. There's that track "Beautiful Creatures,"
Yeah.
and I just the narrative of the poem really kind of hits at it sounds like it's coming from an individual who's very mindful. Um,
Thank you.
um, so is there like this kind of, I guess, kind of diving into that, like, it seems like the nomadic lifestyle is kind of like idealized in a sense of like leaving job security to expand and find yourself. Um, do you like ever run into like I guess like it seems like a weird technology buffer in there? Like there's it seeing people like kind of encapsulated with their devices and stuff, and like being someone who's always been like constantly moving in that way, and kind of seeing someone be constantly or not constantly, but seeing individuals be stopped by this glowing box in their hand is kind of I'm taking this narrative out of it, so I won't say this is you saying that unless it is. Um, but that's kind of the takeaway I got is like there's like these like social structures, and one of them is now in everyone's hand and pocket, that kind of stops you from further expanding into how you said the superheroes you can be.
Right. Um, well, let's put it this way. I think
Sorry.
basically I'm like I love superheroes movies and just fantasy stuff like that. I'm totally into that. And it's because mainly because I always somehow when I'm watching it, I'm thinking like, I always have the feeling this could be us. And they say, people only use a part of their brain
Right.
and all of those things. And I've experienced some pretty miraculous things. And I always have the feeling that we're not really, using all of our potential, and that we get distracted by so many things that somehow are probably meant to distract us, because if we weren't distracted to such an extent, we might actually, do totally different things than we're doing. And like in a really broad sense, like if you think of it, if when I notice that I'm on my phone too much, I put it away and I try to do different things. It's like it's a tool. It's a really great tool to be able to connect with people, and it's a really great tool to do all kinds of technical things with. But it actually also keeps you from living. It distracts you from things that are maybe a lot more important. And I somehow I constantly have the feeling that we're being distracted from the things that are really important. I feel like the industry and all these things that we're told that we should do, like, earn a lot of money, have all these things and whatever, that they're actually distractions from things that could be even greater, but, that we don't see because we're constantly being distracted by the capitalistic world.
The ideal concept of what success is, or what
Exactly.
a successful musician looks like, or artist.
Exactly. And when I moved to Berlin at the beginning, it was nobody had any money, and you didn't really have to work because everything was so cheap. I mean, $15 for an apartment, a huge factory loft, you could earn you just have to go to a cafe, work once a week, and you'd have enough money to pay your rent and food. And it kind of that's why Berlin got its reputation of being such an incredibly creative place, because everybody was just, doing art, doing music, writing philosophy, reading philosophy. And there was such an incredible wealth of ideas, and it was so opulent. And the more people have to race after, being able to earn money and all that, and have to just to survive, and only have that little box to look at in between, it's like everything's been narrowed down to some things that aren't actually even that important if you come down to, think about it.
Right.
So, I mean, one of the really incredible things about the nomadic life was that we gave up our house and we basically sold everything we had. And we had a lot because Alex and me, we liked collecting stuff. And so we had something like 600 boxes or something. It was completely insane. And, we ended up with a tiny storage room where we just kept a couple of instruments and art stuff. And the crazy thing was that, then we started traveling and we didn't miss any of it. And I was like, wow, we didn't expect that. We're probably going to miss everything. We didn't miss anything. And I was like, okay, if you don't miss these things, then why are they so important?
That's a good point. I guess that's fascinating, because when you're in one spot and you kind of design your environment, right? If that couch wasn't there, I would miss sitting on it. You know what I mean? What would I sit on? But when you're constantly moving and always kind of in flux and in the moment of where you're at, you're not really thinking about that couch because
Exactly.
So because I was when I read that, I was like, did they keep a car? Is that how they got around? Like, how do you take all these instruments with you? But if you had like a storage facility, that answers a lot of questions for like at
Yeah,
least some of the bigger pieces that you've made, and like
yeah,
some the drum set. Like,
exactly.
that's
Yeah,
it's incredible how like when something so pure blossoms, so much kind of comes around it to replicate it, and it almost kind of blocks the sunlight from it. And
yeah,
I think that's really really inspiring that you guys chose to completely rearrange how you think of living to preserve that purity and like and go on a crazy adventure if anything.
yeah. Well, I don't know how you feel, but I feel so manipulated nowadays, like, by these insane rents and the way things are, and one is told this is the way the music industry is, and this is the way that is, and this is the way that is. And I've never liked people telling me that. I've always liked inventing my own world, and I've always thought that, it's nice to be able to afford the things that you want, but what's a lot more important to me is the content. That's why I love language so much, because I think that language can give you so much. And I just don't like having to spend so much money on things where I'm like, I don't actually think that it's I don't know, like, I work for a month and I can barely pay my apartment. That just doesn't make sense. That shouldn't be that way. And it just came to a point where we were like, we can't take it. It happened that we were in Canada. We toured for like a month in Canada. And we got home and all the money we had earned, we had to pay for our house. And we were like, this is ridiculous. This just doesn't make sense. This isn't life. We want to see if there's something else out there where where it's more humane. And so then we said, okay, let's just, try it.
And it's the apartment you weren't at, so it's just paying it to have it there.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. It was always
Yeah.
empty. I was
That's
like, that
got
doesn't make sense.
it's got to be like a mind just even like dealing with different currencies and stuff and trying to put it all towards something that's somewhere else. And
Yeah,
I think that's what leads to the acceptance of doing taking the mundane job that was always going to be there, because
yeah,
to tour, it's such a it's such a commitment to maybe make nothing. And when you're doing it, like money is almost, as long as you can get to the next gig, it's like the people and places are like the real pay from it. You know what I mean? Like last night was all right. The Tuesday night was sweet in Vancouver or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and it's a different type of reward every night until I guess you're thinking about the end result of like, well, how do we get back home, or how do we? Well, I guess we didn't make that much. Like, do we keep going? And like, it's almost that discomfort of not knowing if you can cover stuff at home, like
yeah.
leads to
And
that.
also, I mean, I think one really interesting thing about the pandemic is that people have realized how important culture is. I
Definitely.
mean, I was just reading this article today about how, I don't know what it's like in the States at the moment, but here in Europe, all the magazines are becoming really thin because there's nothing to write about.
Right.
And
Right.
newspapers have become really boring because they're just like, there's only to a certain extent that you can write about, economy or whatever. And you can really tell that if culture disappears, life becomes miserable. And I think that's actually really interesting because I hope that it's going to make people, appreciate more the work of artists and musicians and everybody that's dealing that whole area, and are willing to, accept that they should actually be getting a little better pay for that than they are. That's like that
Right.
that whole thing that, I've got my day job, but I'm an artist and I do my art at night so I can survive and stuff like that. It shouldn't be like that. Art,
Definitely.
being a musician, being an artist, being a DJ, journalist, whatever, it should all have, one should be able to earn enough money to survive off of it. And it being taken seriously.
Well, is it? I no, I agree, and it's interesting, like with how streaming and everything's been, and how like without culture, I agree, everything's bleak. It's just kind of like there's no, like the magazines that tell you what's going on around town. We have one called the Scene magazine. It's they even stopped doing it. They put a halt to it because there's nothing going on,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like
Yeah. It's so sad, you know. So it's like teaching the people that it's not something they should take for granted, I guess.
definitely, and I think the majority of people realize it, and like, you know what? I like seeing films in the theater. Like I like
Exactly.
the popcorn or
Yeah,
or just
exactly.
the chance like and I think you can speak on this cuz it seems like everything you've dove into has been kind of per chance and per happening, being kind of in the right place at the right time, but when you take away that uncertainty, that chance of opportunity, and everything becomes very predictable and very mundane, like there's a spark of life that isn't there. And I think, at least I hope, the that this kind of shut in and this kind of shutdown has been hopefully uplifting and energizing the people so they can get the sleep they need and want to immerse themselves in that. Like going to a show and not knowing who you're going to meet is part of that culture you dive into, and when that doesn't exist, it's
Exactly.
you can watch the stream and like maybe chat with somebody, which is a cool second, you know what I mean? It's a way to interact when you can't. Have you guys dove into any streaming? Any of that
We did a little bit at the beginning last March, April, and May, and a couple of festivals asked us to do stuff too, streaming. But then you could tell, like after about half a year, that people were like, at the beginning, lots of people were watching it, and then
right.
you could tell they were being like overwhelmed by all the things they could watch, and I think everybody was getting kind of tired of staring at their computer too. So we thought, we'll take a break from it.
Makes sense. Yeah, I don't I've been helping out local venues and streaming for them here in Cleveland, and like um even doing streams. I'm like, I want to see a show. Like I
Yeah.
get to see it, but I got to watch the screen and switch all the cameras, and it's it's cool but not as cool. And
So
like
you have bands playing, and basically, and then you stream them in the club?
right. So like have you guys ever played in Cleveland?
No,
Okay, well,
sadly no.
when you come to Cleveland, I'll
Yeah,
get you. We'll get you a spot.
cool.
Um, but there's this venue called the Beachland Ballroom, and this venue called the Grog Shop, and like it's kind of like a smaller House of Blues, like if you
Uh-huh.
would to gauge like the size of it. And they would bring in bands, and they would have them play on the stage, and we would stream them from that stage.
Oh,
So there'd
cool.
be like a team, and like at least you're playing for like the people in the room, and
Right.
like and that would go out, and there was a Cleveland had a really cool support system and still does, where like there is these virtual concert series where you would donate $5 again to a Zoom stream, and that would get split up
Oh,
between the
wow.
acts. And right when the shutdown happened, that took off, and
Wow.
all yeah, it was really cool and really inspiring, because everyone was just helping everyone out, and like it wasn't like this
Yeah.
kind of alienation, like, and there was all these pools to do like benefits and such like that. um so there's like this
Great.
supportive hub, and that made streaming cool, but at the same time it's still alienating and weird and not quite the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've had basically a lockdown here now since last March where we can't even do that. We can't even go into a club and play together as a band.
Wow. Yeah, that's got to be a huge, especially for you two. That's got to be a huge like cabin fever. Like,
Yeah. Well, especially because we don't really have an apartment here. We just have like an office where we sleep, and it's like we have studios now and an office, which are close to each other, which is good because we can walk. But we don't have an apartment, so it's been kind of like thank God we have the studios. Otherwise, we'd probably like gone crazy.
right. At least something to focus on. Did you finish that? You're working on a silent film about your guys' journey at Crossroads.
Oh yeah, that's I did that a long time ago. That's like
Okay.
4 years ago. Yeah.
Gotcha. I saw on Vimeo the trailer for it. Um,
Right.
and like so has like to kind of segue for one more like topic, at least with like film, have you dove into any like film projects? Because that's a really thing you can focus on when you're stuck in one spot. Editing film takes forever, or videos at least.
Well, I've been doing the videos for my new album. I'm just finishing the third one. And I've also been working on a video for the our next upcoming Hacke de Picciotto album, which is probably going to come out in May or something. So I've been
Cool.
doing that pretty much. But basically, I've been doing more. I mean, after I finished my solo album and released it, we immediately went into the studio and started recording our next Hacke de Picciotto album. So we just finished recording that. So I've been doing a lot of music.
That's awesome. I mean, it seems a little more feasible than film stuff, like, because you gotta get scenes from other places. But what you're doing with the videos for your new album, like the really cool like animated works of your art,
Uh-huh.
those are really rad. Like
Thanks.
that has to be a fairly tedious stop motion, or I don't even know how you construct something like that, but it's really fitting for especially the one for Beautiful Creatures.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
but
Yeah, I have a friend who's animation artist, and he's amazing. So we work together on that. Otherwise, if I would do it alone, I'd probably take like 100 years. And so what I do is I do all the drawings, and then I kind of make very simple kind of variations of them, and then he works on them and he does like animation. So it's a lot of work because I have to do a lot of drawings for that,
right.
but still, it's really fun to do it with him because every time he sends me, my drawings, he sends them back to me and they're moving. It's like, yeah,
It's alive, alive. That's awesome.
it's really fun.
Was it? Well, Danielle, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to chat with me. I really appreciate your time. I've really enjoyed diving into your career and trying to understand like the Berlin techno scene and like all these art movements and you as an artist is so fascinating. Like how you found this space in it's always with like the always with you and you're moving through all these things and like I've chanced upon all these like techno docs and even just interviews and like your name would keep popping up. I'm like, whoa, I'm not I'm going down the right angle here or right lane of studying. I don't know, but so it's been very fascinating and enjoyable to dive into your career, and I appreciate your time. So thank you
Oh,
so
thank
much for
you
chatting
so
with
much.
me.
Yeah, it's been really fun. Thank you so much.